Hi, this is Involved Innovation YouTube channel. In this video, we will see about what is Spring Cloud OpenFeign. OpenFeign is a declarative REST client. Feign makes writing REST clients easier with the annotation, which includes feign annotations and also the traditional JAX RS annotations. We will see this in action in this tutorial. In this video, we will cover the different topics in OpenFeign. We will create a base project starting from the Spring template, and then we will call the book service using the feign client, and then we will call two different services with basic-auth, and here we will use two different credentials to connect to these two different REST services with the help of configuration. Next, we will see about logger. What are the different log levels available in the OpenFeign, and we will declare a custom logger level. And we will also see about request interceptor, how the request interceptor is used to intercept the request before sending the call to the real REST service. Next, we will see about the error decoder. Error decoder is very handy if you want to throw your own custom exception based on the error code which you are receiving from the REST service which you are calling. Next, we will see about the fallback. The fallback is a circuit breaker mechanism. Here, what happens if the REST service which you are calling doesn't respond or results in error? So here, we will declare the fallback mechanism. So this acts as a fallback. So whenever there is something going wrong with your real REST service, you can do something in the fallback. So with that being said, we will start with the template. So we will create a Spring project with Spring initializer. So go to start.spring.io. So here in this case, I will name this group com.wispath library, and then demo project for Spring Cloud OpenFeign. And then we will stick to the Java version 17. Spring Boot version is 2.7.4. It's a Maven project and it is a Java project. In the dependencies, we will start with the Spring Web. So type web here and then add dependencies. Usually I will add Lombok to all my projects, which is used to reduce the boilerplate code. And then we will also add the dependency OpenFeign. So these are all the dependencies to start with. And then we will click generate. So once you click generate, you will get the zip back. So open this in folder. So here I will open the command prompt, and then here I will open this folder in IntelliJ idea. First we will go to the POM dependencies. So here in this case, we have the dependencies such as Spring Boot Starter Web, and then Spring Cloud Starter OpenFeign, and then we have the Lombok dependencies, and then we have test dependencies. Here one thing to notice, we need to make sure whenever you are adding this manually, so you also need to add this dependency management. Here in the dependency management, you can able to see the dependencies. In the dependencies, we are calling the Spring Cloud dependencies. If you are adding this OpenFeign in your existing Spring Boot application, you need to make sure you are having this dependency management, and also you need to make sure you have the supporting properties here. So here in the properties, we can able to see the Spring Cloud version. Here we have our base project. So first to start with, we need to annotate this with enable feign clients at enable feign clients. Next we will create. So for this tutorial, I will use this mock service. So this mock service is written in Eternity. You can find this complete project in my GitHub repository. I will just give a gist about what this service does. So here in this case, this service has a path param which is ID, and it also has request param which is a name, and here in this case it just prints the headers, and here we are generating the content based on the param value which we are sending in the name. And then we will be sending out always a response status as 200, and we are giving the response delay here as 2000 milliseconds, and then we are setting the ID to the path params ID, and here we are sending out this JSON. So we will create an image. So docker build -t Kareta mark dot. So this will create an image named Kareta mark. Next I will run this image in the port 5000. It accepts the argument which is 5000, and I am running this service in the port 5000. Now we can able to see this is the response we got. Here we are supplying the path param as 1234, and then here the request param as Spring Boot, and which is name. So here in the response we got the name as Spring Boot, whichever we have supplied, and then here in the content we got book title followed by the name which we have supplied, and then here we have the ID. I have also created a complete video tutorial on Kareta Neti, created this complete mock service, the link of which I have provided in the description. So this is the service which we are going to call with our OpenFeign. So we have our base project set. So here we have entered the annotation at enable feign clients. Next we will create the feign client, new Java class. Here in this case this is not a class, this is an interface, client.book client 1. So I'm just naming this as book client 1 because I'm gonna create another client, that is book client 2. We need to annotate this with add component. Here this is where the feign client really shines. So here we no need to do anything extra, just we need to add the feign client annotation. So to do that we need to give this annotation at feign client, and here in this case these are different key value pairs. I will go to the resources folder, rename this file as YAML. The YAML makes the things grouped nicely, so I am going with YAML format. So if you are fine with properties, that is also completely fine. This is just personal preference. I have already created a property, so this property is book client 1, and then we have the domain URL as http localhost 5000. This is our domain URL, and then we will give the username as test and then password as password. So we have the retrieve book URL as book followed by the path param. So we have our base properties in our application YAML. So now we go back to the feign client. So here in this case we will give the name. Whenever you are creating a feign client, name is a mandatory and this should be unique. So for example, if in your application if you have more than one feign client, you need to make sure this name is unique in your project. So here in this case I am taking this from the application YAML. To take this from application YAML, you need to use the syntax $flower brace book service client1 dot name, and then next parameter is the URL. So here we need to give the domain URL or the host name URL equal to double quotes $book service client1 dot URL. First I need to create a model. Book service returns an object with the three parameters. One is ID and then name and then content. So I will be creating a model with these three properties: private string ID, and then private string, and then this is name, and then private string, and this is content. So here we will use Lombok to generate the getters and setters. So we will use at data annotation. So this is where the Lombok shines here. At data creates the getters and setters for you, and also we will give at all args constructor and at no args constructor. Now we have created our model. We will put this in a package. So create package, this model, and we will move this refactor. Now we will return this model from the service. So this is book, get book data, and then we have already seen this book data takes one path variable and then one request param. So here in this case we need to write at path variable. So at path variable ID, mark this as string ID, and then the next one is at request param, and the request param is name here, and then this is string name. Now we have created our method. So now we need to define the mapping. This is similar to how you are gonna create new REST endpoint. So this is a get method. So I am marking this as get mapping, and the path I have already defined in the application.yaml. So this is the path. So here path equal to $book service client 1 dot retrieve book dot URL. So now we have created our feign client. Now we will define a service. So I will create a new class. I will name this as library service and I will annotate this with @service. We need to make sure we are using our book client here. So private final, I am marking this as final, and then book client 1 and then book client 1. So here whenever you are calling this, you need to make sure you have the constructors. You need to create the constructor. So I have annotation in Lombok, that is @record args constructor. So if you give this annotation, this will generate the record args constructor for this particular class. Next we will define a service. So here in this case, public book and then get book data 1 for ID. So this takes two parameters, one is ID and another one is name, and then here we will return book client dot get book data. Here first one is ID, second one is name. Now we have created our base service. So here in the base service we are calling the book client which we have created. This is a feign client, and here we have created a method. In this method we are getting the ID and name, and we are calling the book client 1 dot get book data with the ID and name. Now we will create our controller. So for that I will make this as library controller, put this inside the package controller, and I will annotate this with REST controller. So here we will call the library service private library service, then library service, and we will auto wire this. Next we will define a get mapping. So here in this case we will define a method. So this method is public, and this method returns book, and this is get library data 1, and this also takes a path variable. So I will copy and paste from the book client. So this looks exactly similar like this, but this is a library service which we are going to create. So we are going to use the path variable, and the path variable is ID, and then the request param is name. Return library service dot get book data 1, and here we need to get the ID and then name. Now it is perfect. Now we need to mark this as get method. So to do that, get mapping and the path as library 1, and then here it takes a path param. So here in this case this is an ID path param, and then this produces media type dot application JSON value. Now we have created our base application, and then here in this application we are calling the book service. This is how we will create. What we have done is we have only created a feign client, and here in this case we have just created it with a declarative annotation. We have given the name, so this is a unique name, and then here we have our base URL. So this is the base URL of the service which we are gonna call. This is the path which we are gonna call in the service, and then here we have passed in the path variable and then the request param. So far so good. Now we will start the application. The library service is not in the package, so we will create a package here, new package named service, and then we will refactor and move this to this service. Perfect. Now we will go to the library package, and here we also given the @enable feign clients. This is really important. If you have given this annotation, then only it will look for @feign client. Start the application here. So here we have made a mistake. Here this is not URL, this is a domain URL. So we need to give the domain URL instead of URL. So copy and paste the domain URL here. Now we will restart the application. Now the application started. So here we have called localhost 8080 library 1, and then the path param is 12342, and then the name as Spring Boot. So here from the library service we have called the book service. This is a mock service which we have created using Eternity. We have used Spring Cloud OpenFeign to call this service. By this way we can simply create a REST client with the OpenFeign. Now we will see what happens if we need to pass basic auth? We need to define our own configuration. So here in the configuration, we can place the username and password in the headers. To do that, I will create a configuration. So this is a Java class. I will place this inside the config package, config book client config 1 at bean. So here this is the config which we are going to use for the book client. So this config has everything. So to start with, I am just creating the basic auth request interceptor. So this basic auth request interceptor will intercept the request before sending it to the real service, public, and then basic auth request interceptor, and here basic auth request interceptor, and then book service. We have defined the username and password in the application.yaml. With the help of @value annotation, got the username from the application.yaml, and then we got the password from the application.yaml. So ideally this is not the correct approach. You should have this username and password in some external configuration which must be secured, and we will return new basic auth interceptor. Takes two parameters, one is username and another one is password. Now we have defined our config, and here we have also defined a bean. So this bean, we have our basic auth interceptor. So one key thing to note here is we should not annotate this with @configuration. Why? Because if you have more than one client in your application, for example, if you have like book service, library and service, all those services you need to call from this library service, then if you have annotated that with @configuration, then every feign client will be using the same basic auth interceptor. To stop that, we need to stop annotating this with @configuration. We need to only give @bean annotation here. We need to go back to our feign client, and then here we need to add another key value param, which is configuration. This config is book client config1.class. So now we have created a configuration. Now we will stop the application and then start the application again. Now we will see whether this username and password is sent to the book service or not. And then go to the correct entity. So here I have logged the request headers. So you can able to see it sends the basic. So if you decode this base64, you can able to see we are passing test and password. So this is the username and password which we are sending it here. So now we will make the things little tricky. Now we will create two different clients, and we will also make sure we are having two different username and password. And for the sake of simplicity, I will run the same book service in another port. So already it is running in the port 5000. I will run the Docker image which I have already created, and here instead of 5000 we will make sure we are running it in 4000, and the application is running in the 4000. Now I will go to our browser and we can check whether this is correct. So we will duplicate this tab, and here instead of 5000 we will call 4000. This is working fine. So now we have two REST services running, and this is the same book service, and for the sake of simplicity I have run this image twice with two different ports. So this acts like a two different service. So we will go back to our application and we will copy this again, and we will mark this as client 2, and then here instead of test I will give this as user, and instead of password I will give this as pass. As I mentioned before, the name must be always unique for the feign client. So here we need to rename this to book service 2, and then here we need to also change the domain URL to 4000. Consider this as a different client and this as a different client. So here we need to create another book client. So new Java class, here this is an interface, and then we need to make sure this name is book client 2, and then I will copy this, then paste it here. I need to make sure I am changing everything, and then here instead of 1 this is 2, here also this must be 2, and here also this must be 2. We should not use the book client config 1. If you are using the book client config 1, that means then you are using the same username and password. So for this I will create another class. Now go back to this class, copy everything and paste it here, and then instead of 1 I will mark this as 2. So here instead of 1 I will mark this as 2, instead of I will mark this as 2. Go back to our book client and then here mark this as 2. Now we have created 2 different client, and this 2 different client has 2 different config. This book client configuration doesn't have that configuration annotation. Now we will go back to the service. So here in the service, I will copy this and paste it again. Copy the book client. Now we will copy this and paste it again. There's no issues here. Now what we have done is we have created 2 different client and we have created 2 different config, and then here in the service we have created 2 different methods, one calling the book client 1 and another calling the book client 2. Here in the controller we have 2 get mapping now. One is library 1, another one is library 2. In the library 2 we are calling the book data 2, which is running in the port 4000, and book data 1 is running in the port 5000. Now we will restart the application. Start the application. Application started without any issue. We will duplicate this again, and here in this case instead of library 1 I am giving it as library 2. Now if you go back here, we can able to see this is coming with basic auth. Now we will decode this. So if you decode this, you can able to see the username and password is user and pass. By this way we have created 2 different client in the same application, calling 2 different REST service and passing in 2 different username and password. So now we have seen how to call multiple REST service with different username and password. Now we will see how to set up the logger level in the book client feign. So to do that, we need to set logger.level. I am making this function name as feign logger level, return logger level dot. So here we can able to see there are full, basic, none, and then headers. So here the none is default, so I am giving the logger level as full, logger.level.full. And then here we need to annotate this with @bean annotation, and then we can do the same in our another config as well. By this way you can define your logger level. Next we will see about how to intercept your request with the request interceptor. The request interceptor is used to intercept the request which you are sending to the real REST service. If you intercept the request, you can add anything to that request template. So we will see this in detail. So for this I will create a method. So I will name this as public, and then this should return request interceptor. For this I will set the value, username and password in the header. So I will copy this, paste it again, and then here return request template dot header, and this takes a key value pair. So here the key is user and then the value is username, request template dot header, and then the key is password and then the value is password. Now we need to annotate this with @bean annotation, @bean. Now we will copy this request interceptor and we will place this in the book client config 2 as well. So here instead of 1 I will name this as 2. So this is perfectly fine. Now we have defined the request interceptor. Here in the request interceptor I am intercepting the request which is sent to the book service, and here I am adding user and password. So now if you go and see, here we don't have any header with user and password, we only have the basic authorization. Once you intercept and put the user and password directly in the header, you can able to see user and the username and then password and the password. So now we will start the application. Now the application started fine. Now we will go back here and then refresh this library 1, and then I will refresh this library 2. So now go back to library 1 which is running in 5000. Now if you can able to see here, there is another header which is user, and then the test is passed here, and then another header which is password, and password is passed here. And if you go back to another client, you can able to see the user is user. Now we have seen how to intercept the request based on the response code which is sent from the service, and if this is error response code, then we will throw our own custom exception. So for this I will create a new exception type. This is bad request exception, and this extends runtime exception, and we will create a constructor here, public bad request exception, and this takes a string message, and then we will call the super with the message. That means we are calling the runtime exception constructor and we will pass this message. Now we have created our own exception, and we will create a package and then we place that here. Exception, then we will place this exception here. So far so good. And now we will create our own decoder. I will keep a same decoder for both book client config 1 and book client config 2. Feign error decoder, and then here we need to make sure we are implementing the error decoder here. Implements error decoder. So this is coming from feign codec. So you need to make sure you are implementing the error decoder, and once you are implementing this, you also need to implement the methods. The decode is the mandatory method. So here I'm just writing a switch condition. Switch. Here I am just taking the response dot status. So based on the response status, here the case is 400. So if there is an error which is other than 200 and 200 series, this will be returned to this particular decoder. So I will write a particular case for 400. So here in this case I will return new bad request exception. We can also define a default statement here, and here return a new exception. So I will library generic exception. Here the decode will be invoked whenever there is an error, and here we have defined our own customized bad request exception. In the case if the response status is 400, for all other error response we are throwing the default exception. So in this case we have created a decoder, and we also keep this inside a package. Now this is fine. Now we will go back to the config. Here we need to define the error decoder. So at bean public error decoder, and then here I am naming this as error decoder, and return new feign error decoder. This is perfect. Now we have defined our feign error decoder, and here in the feign error decoder we have thrown our own customized exception. To simulate this, what I am gonna do is I am gonna create another image. So now we have two different clients. One is running in 5000 and one is running in 4000. I'll go there, and then I will mark this response status as 400, and then here I will just give content, and this is just bad. Now we have simulated this. We will create another image based on this feature file. So for all the calls we will get the 400 with bad request. Now we'll go to the Docker, and here we will stop this 5000 and delete this 5000. So now we have only one client running in 4000. So here we will create an image, and I will name this as character mark 400, and here we will run the image character mark 400 in the 5000. Now it is running fine, and go to the Docker. You can able to see two different container running, one on 4000, one on 5000, and in the images you can able to see there is two different images. One is character mark which returns valid response, and the 400 will always return as 400. So to check this, we will go to the 5000 and we will refresh. We can able to see we are getting content as bad request, and here if we refresh we are still getting the valid response. Stop the application, start the application again. Now we have started the application. There is error in 5000, so library 1 is using 5000. So before invoking library 1, I will go to library 2 and I will refresh. I can able to see this is working fine, but if I refresh the library 1, I got this error, and if I go back to the application, I can able to see bad request error from book service. So this is the error which we are throwing. So this is the bad request exception, and this we are throwing when the response status is 400. By this way we can write our own decoder. So here in this case I have written a decoder based on the response status. Next we will see about how to do a fallback. This is really important in the current world, so you need to make sure our application is resilient. To do that I will create fallback. So first create a Java class. Here I will name this as fallback package and then book fallback 1, and I will annotate this with @component fallback 1. So here this fallback component must implement our client. So here in this case this fallback is for the book client 1. It must implement the book client 1 interface. Implement methods. Now here I will return a book object, a new book, and then here I will pass 1 2 3 comma this path 1 comma content. Now we have defined our fallback. Now we need to go back to our book client here, and then here fallback equal to, and then book fallback 1 dot class. Now we have defined the fallback here, and what happens here is if this method ends up in error, then this will automatically invoke whatever the method we have here. So here in this case we have defined our fallback. So here we have our get book data. So this will be invoked whenever there is error, and we will create another class book fallback 2, and here this must implement book client 2 implement methods. Okay, and here we need to use @component annotation. Go to book fallback 1, copy and paste this here. So here instead of 1 I will put this as 2, and here 2, and here of 1 2 3 I will put this as 1 2 4. Go to book client, and here we need to add the third key value pair, which is fallback equivalent to book fallback 2 dot class. Now we have done our basic setup. Now the fallback won't be invoked. So to do that, what we need to do is, so we need to add two different things. One is we need to make sure in the application.yaml we have feign and then circuit breaker enabled. So this is the first step which we need to do here. So here feign circuit breaker enable equivalent to true. Next, so you need to add the resilience4j circuit breaker dependency. So here go to Spring Initializer to get the dependency. Click add dependency, and here circuit. So here type circuit breaker. You can able to see the resilience4j, and click explore. You can able to see this new dependency got added. So copy this dependency and paste it to your POM file. As I mentioned before, this too doesn't comes with version, so this takes the version from Spring Cloud version. So you need to make sure you have this dependency management. Here we have defined the Spring Cloud dependency, so we need to make sure we have this dependency management in place. So I will refresh the Maven here. Our application, now we'll start the application. Go to the application, stop and rerun. Build success. Now application is started. Now we will execute the library 2. So if we execute the library 2, this will invoke the localhost 4000. There is no issue with 4000. So if you refresh, we should not see any change. So far so good. We didn't see any change because this invoked this service. So this service gave the response code as 200. So we are fine. Now we will execute this again. We got 1 2 3 vispath 1 and then the content 1. So this is not the value which we are passing in. So here the path param is 1 2 3 4 2, and then here we have the name as Spring Boot, but here we are getting this as vispath. This is because whenever there is a problem, it identified there is a response code of 400. That means there is an exception here. So if there is an exception, it automatically calls the fallback. This identifies this method results in error, so this calls the fallback. So here in the fallback we have defined the exact same methods in the fallback component. This is because we are implementing this book client 1 in the fallback 1. So if you see here, we are returning 123 vispath 1 and then the content as 1. Now this is why we can able to see vispath 1 content 1. Now what we can do is we will stop the client which is running in port 4000. Now execute this 4000. We are not seeing anything. This gave us connection refused. This is perfect. This connects to this 4000. Now if you refresh, here you got vispath 2. This is because here we have our book line 2 and this book line 2 calls this book data and this results in error 500 and then it called the book fallback 2 and here we have defined 1 to 4 vispath 2 and then content 2. By this way you can define your own fallback. Here in this case this can be anything like putting the message in the queue, and once the real service is up you can run the messages in the queue to the real service. We have covered all the topics in OpenFeign. Thanks for watching this video. For more technical videos, subscribe to this channel. If you find this video helpful, like this content and share it with your friends.